Chapter 1 Flashing Lights. Nikhil Burman parked his car beside National Highway 37 in Silchar, Assam, turned on the hazard lights, and waited in the darkness. The blinking lights were for the people coming down from the distant towns and villages. Few people could find on a map. He could not see them, but wanted them to see him. They were coming for him. While he waited, same as every night at 8:30, a crowd grew around the car. Older women, young men and women, people of all ages, all thrust their papers and their questions at him. His phones rang endlessly. Arriving trains brought more people and more questions. His visitors came because they were sick and deeply in need of anyone who could help. Someone, a friend or relative in their village, had told them of a man who parked his car beside the highway, turned on the flashing lights, and answered questions. That was what brought them out of the hills, across living root bridges 100 years old, down mountain roads that ran along ravines and across state lines, someone who could guide them to the right doctor. The surprise was that Nikhil was a driver and had no medical training at all. His expertise was in helping patients go where they needed to be. Few patients asked him about his qualifications. He seemed to know what he was doing. He listened patiently to one caller's lengthy list of complaints, noting them down on his other phone, an old piece that had a chipped screen and was worn at the edges. He composed reminders to himself on SMSs, typing the patient's name and a code for which test had to be done. Sabita Bhomik, GC, or Rajiv Das, SKD. He told the caller to not eat because the tests he needed required an empty stomach. Nikhil could not discuss the particulars of the caller's ailments, but assured him that he would arrange the pickup from Silchar railway station. Appointments with doctors, examinations and tests, and even a place to stay. Nikhil was nearly 40, but looked a decade younger. It was his manner, firm, businesslike, reassuring, that gave strangers confidence. A man stepped out of a rickshaw and walked over to Nikhil. He introduced himself, handed over some papers, and without being asked, bowed to present his head. Nikhil assessed the nature of the lump on the man's skull with two fingers, like a doctor would. In less than a minute, he concluded which doctor the man had to see. An elderly villager walked up. She was tired, and worry written over her face. This was her first time outside her village. This was the first time she had been so sick. Her stomach hurt, and no one in the village knew what to do. Someone told her about a driver who could lead her to the right treatment and gave her Nikhil's number. Now she found herself, a 9-hour train journey later, on a dark highway in front of a complete stranger handing over her medical file. Nikhil found a woman, a place to stay, and prepared her for what would come next. He told her they would drive to Kalyani Hospital the next day, consult doctors, and do some tests. He explained that an operation could follow. The woman listened, but could not stop worrying. She was all alone. To reassure her, Nikhil told her he would buy her medicines from a pharmacy and take care of any other formalities associated with the surgery. But if you die here, he remembered to tell her, I will not send back your body to Tripura. I will arrange for you to be cremated here. Understood? In the end, it was a simple procedure to remove a few kidney stones, no complications. Still, Nikhil had worked with patients for a long time. She was older, and he didn't want to take any chances. Chapter 2 Playing Roles. Each evening, Nikhil met with dozens of patients to help them understand what to expect from their visit to Silchars, hospitals, and clinics. On any given day, he estimated there were usually over 200 phone calls from patients in Tripura. Nikhil's career as a full time medical coordinator came about entirely by accident. In 2000, soon after he finished school, he began shuttling passengers across Silchar in his father's auto rickshaw. One of his frequent customers, a senior doctor at a charitable hospital in the town, found him dependable enough to ask a question. Would Nikhil like to transport patients between the places where they were receiving medical treatment? Nikhil agreed. Before long, he began to view life through patients' eyes. Most patients required active help on their arrival in Silchar, having only heard of the place. They arrived bewildered and clutching their medical files, not on a professional's advice, but on the recommendations of a friend, family member, or neighbor. This meant that few doctors were referring patients to specialists, which in turn meant that patients spent time trying to find the right doctor all by themselves. They wandered out of consultations and surgeries, wondering what to do next. They all seemed lost and uneasy this far from home, in an unfamiliar and imposing town that bustled with noise, energy, and action. Once they did find a doctor, there was a small matter that doctors and patients spoke different languages. Nikhil saw doctors speak in their second or third language to a nurse, who then struggled to translate complex diagnosis and prognosis to patients in a regional dialect. One could only guess how much he was lost in translation. Nikhil sensed a deep suspicion with which rural patients approached doctors in large hospitals. Beyond the question of whether patients could comply with instructions they only partially understood, he observed a deeper disconnect, of which differences in language was only the most apparent part. It was human nature to be less trusting in a foreign environment, especially if the diagnosis was of life altering significance. When people traveled a long way for medical treatment, the problem was probably a serious one, something that did not have a simple cure. But the shock of a diagnosis was often so great that they refused to trust anything doctors said and refused to act on medical advice until it was too late. Most had never undergone diagnostic tests and never been required to understand what reports said. Besides, they were preoccupied with the more mundane concerns: an affordable place to stay in town, transportation, medicine, appointments. Nurses and doctors were ready to help, of course, but there were endless lines of patients and not enough healthcare providers. They were already doing all kinds of work to keep the hospitals running. Doctors administered injections that nurses otherwise would, and nurses filed documents, made funeral arrangements, and did paperwork for government schemes. Witnessing all of this, Nikhil realized that patients longed for guidance from someone who felt friendly and familiar, someone who could coax and cajole them as a youth from their village might, someone who could simplify the process of seeking help and alleviate the helplessness they felt. The entire edifice of healthcare relies on creating an environment of trust. Yet trust was in short supply. Nikhil saw the role he could play. Patients come here thinking they know what ails them and what they might need to do, he said. When they receive a different diagnosis, they get overwhelmed. They need guidance. They need to hear their options carefully explained. Navigating the medical system itself would be the least of their problems. Nikhil saw himself primarily as a logistics manager. But while he was careful not to give medical advice, he frequently ended up as a de facto triage nurse, directing patients to certain facilities based on his past experience with cases like theirs. He charged a minuscule daily amount for his services and fully expected to be haggled down. Several patients needed discounts, and 1 in 5 was too poor to pay at all. If someone could not afford even the bargain down price, Nikhil waived his fee. Demand continued to grow, and providing guidance became a full time business. His fleet of cars grew to 7 vehicles. His relatives joined the business, doing what he did. But Nikhil was in it through and through. On occasion, he paused work to donate blood to a customer. Seen one way, Nikhil was an entrepreneur, ingenious in finding and serving a market. Across Silchar, their lights blinking in the night, other drivers played a similar role. But seen another way, if India's systems worked the way they were intended, this market would not exist at all. Chapter 3: Wrapping Technology Around People. Indians go to spectacular lengths for the most basic things. The graduates who join millions to apply for a few dozen entry level positions. The rural traveler undertaking an epic journey from home to see a doctor while she worries about her work, her money, her family. When an endeavor is successful, the effort it takes is forgotten. The enormous odds, once they're overcome, gradually seem less daunting. But this success is also a sign of deficiency. Unexceptional tasks are made exceptional only by the difficulty in achieving them. We believe there is a way to make things easier. Using technology the right way with targeted interventions, India can remove long standing access to barriers to vital services. Bridgital wraps technological advances around India's most abundant resource, its people, to multiply their capabilities and change how they work. When we think about the future of technology and work, there are three important distinctions that set India apart from advanced economies, and that make Bridgital a significant opportunity for the country. First, India's lack of markets mean access will take precedence over efficiency. Advanced economies have a host of mature markets in which digital transformation is focused on increasing efficiency. India doesn't lack efficient markets, it lacks markets themselves. In the absence of these outlets, people fill in and operate independently, sometimes at the very edge of the law, meeting the unfulfilled demand for healthcare or other basic goods and services. The absence of mature markets is evident in financial services. Despite the success of the historic Jan Dhan Yojana, India's ambitious financial inclusion program that increased bank account penetration from about 50% to 80% in just 3 years, there is still work to be done. The country has around 190 million adults without a bank account, making it the world's second largest unbanked population after China. Of those who have a bank account, almost half did not use it in 2017, preferring to use cash for spending and saving. New age financial technology companies are already stepping in with data and technology led approaches to meet the demands of the underserved. For example, low income entrepreneurs who never had been able to access capital from banks can do so as companies use analytics to assess their trustworthiness, reducing reliances on collateral and credit scores. Building entirely new markets is a different beast to optimizing existing ones. It means prioritizing access alongside efficiency. Technology adoption will create new markets within the Indian economy. As they are created and entirely new ecosystems begin to form and spread, there will be demand for people skilled in the ways of these new technologies. We believe that digital workers, digitally literate and intermediately skilled workers whose capabilities are complemented by technology, can play a pivotal role in traversing the barriers that have prevented markets from developing. This is an opportunity to create a new category of worker who acts as a bridge, a guide, and a translator. As with cars, planes, and computers, where new markets develop, new ecosystems flourish around them. For example, these ecosystems have already grown around the mobile revolution in Africa. Kenya's largest mobile operator directly employs only around 5,500 people, but has spurred the creation of over 130,000 mobile money outlets to handle the country's transition from cash to mobile money. Second, India faces a perennially limited supply of skilled human resources and physical assets. It is widely known that India does not have enough skilled resources and expertise. Accompanying this is a lack of infrastructure and physical resources as well. India has only half the number of doctors recommended by the World Health Organization. The availability of hospital beds is even more problematic, with around two-thirds fewer beds than the global average. A citizen in rural India experiences even greater deprivation than the overall figure suggests, because resources tend to agglomerate in larger cities. More than 60% of hospitals are in urban India, where about a third of India resides. With a population of 1.3 billion and growing, India does not have enough physical infrastructure: hospitals, roads, schools, warehouses, testing centers to match the challenges posed by its scale. India is making gains on this matrix, but will continue to be a stretched society. It will need to make the most of what resources it does have, through a combination of both people and technology. Third, India's demographics demand a different approach to automation and AI. Developed economies are well into middle age. China and the US will have a median age over 38 by 2020. Japan's will be over 48. The older that countries get, the fewer workers they will have available. The shortage drives them to develop technologies that can substitute for labor. As aging economies have automated, they have transformed production practices, making them leaner and more efficient. The choices they have made are about efficiency, a response to their particular concerns. In contrast, the median age of India's population will be 28 by 2020 and 31 by 2030. The problem India has is not of age of numbers, it is skills and qualifications. Therefore, India's approach to automation has to be distinct from China, the US, and Japan. It has to focus on technologies that augment and raise people's skills. India will not be able to simply cut and paste China's and much of Asia's development path. It will need to forge a new path and bring the 20th century growth model of manufacturing led development into the 21st century. This new growth model requires an alternative strategy, boosting a range of labor intensive, intermediate economic activities that take care of India's vast unmet demand and shift people towards more formal characteristics of work. Bridgital is a way of just doing this. In the early 1980s, there was no playbook for what came to be known as outsourcing. Tata Consultancy Services, or TCS, India's first IT services firm, was then a far smaller organization. It had to convince hesitant clients that India had the brightest engineers and they could meet every business demand. Back then, it was common for representatives of large US and European companies to attend meetings, listen attentively, and politely decline to have a part of their work handled thousands of kilometers away. At one meeting, the head of a credit card company listened to a visiting TCS team distractedly, and then at the end of the meeting said, "I don't believe you guys can do it. I'm not risking it. This has never been tested." To this, the leader of the TCS contingent replied, "I hope you will call me back." Within months, the company heard company head called back. In a short while, other calls followed. From the city of Detroit for software for its police force, from a company in New York that wanted its banking software serviced, from Phoenix, Sydney, Venezuela. They were all participants in the third industrial revolution, a period marked by the proliferation of computers and the development of information technology. It eventually led to the absorption of business models like global supply chains and business process outsourcing that are commonplace today, but were unthinkable at the time. Technology's upheavals are constant. However, and no sooner was the third over than the fourth industrial revolution began. Even so, keeping an eye on the future requires learning from the past. Three key lessons learned from building lasting businesses that ride the waves of technology's disruptions serve us well when thinking about Bridgital. The first lesson: technology alone does not solve difficult problems. But when technology is applied in context with reimagined processes, the results can be magical. Consider the case of electricity. When this new stream of power started to replace the steam engine and water wheels as a primary source of energy, the first 20 years up to 1920 registered just small improvements in productivity. It was only between 1920 and 1935 when businesses changed to take advantage of the new technology that factories achieved an immense growth in productivity. Before electricity, factories were designed around the constraints of the single fixed power source, which dictated where immovable machines would be placed. There wasn't much choice. The product of those machines, half finished articles, were wheeled around the factory and moved from machine to machine. Electricity, with its ease of distribution, allowed for a more logical arrangement of machines, making the process faster, more efficient, and reducing waste. In the final calculation, the indirect gains from changing factory processes far outweighed the direct benefit of the lower energy costs electricity offered. Still, technology alone tempts us time and again. And so, solutions to pressing problems are seen only in technological terms. This explains why India has no dearth of advocates for stacks and platforms for agriculture, education, the judiciary, and health. Yet, applied in isolation, technological solutions can end up wasting time and money. The husks of digital only thinking are all around us. One of the more well known examples is the Akash tablet program, whose objective was to make education accessible to over 5 million students by digitizing contents and making it freely available on low cost tablets. The ambition was there, the foundation wasn't. An initial trial revealed issues with the device's battery, screen, and sound. The program focused too heavily on developing an affordable device and not enough on the content or how a tablet could change students' educational experience. Not there was any clarity on which textbooks should be digitized. In class, teachers shunned the device. Akash ended up being just a low cost device that could run a few apps and handle a few different file formats. The program was shut down in March 2015, having fallen short of its laudable intentions. What really crippled the program was not the operational delays or logistical failures, but the assumption that placing a tablet in a student's hand would solve everything, a critique of the program wrote. When the tablets would ultimately do was become, for those who couldn't afford to maintain and use them, a burden. This technology is great trap. By failing to understand context, we end up with incredibly dazzling technology answers for the completely wrong question. We need to keep this in mind when deploying fourth industrial revolution technologies in the real world. Reimagining processes can deliver much greater value from the direct gains afforded by new technology. The second lesson comes from learning in our work that there is no such thing as purely digital or purely physical. All digital solutions interact with and add value to the physical world. We need to maintain an integrated physical digital perspective, asking how these two realms can complement rather than substitute for each other. That is playing our most starkly in modern retail, where key players from mass market to niche, large incumbents to small upstarts are all shifting to a seamless multi channel experience for customers. Online retailers from the US to China are increasingly realizing the value of a physical space where customers can experience products. Conversely, incumbent retailers with physical stores realize the value, convenience, and efficiencies of an online digital assist to their customers, whose buying journey increasingly demands the flexibility of this dual approach. Meanwhile, physical infrastructure will benefit from incorporating digital interfaces and sensors. Everything from oil rigs to farm crops are being integrated into the Internet of Things, machines that talk to each other on different kinds of networks. This will inevitably translate to more efficient resource usage in the physical world. Take the case of smart farming, where GPS data, soil scanning data, and other bits of information can be used to make micro level decisions about fertilizer and pesticide use. This can even take into account variations across the same farm, greatly improving yields and optimizing the use of inputs. Pitting technology against human world is also a false choice. In analyzing the performance of more than 1,000 companies across 12 industries, recent global research has found that firms achieve the most significant performance improvements when humans and machines work together. Companies that most holistically embrace the principles of human machine collaboration saw more than thrice the level of operational performance improvements as those that used AI tools to substitute for workers. In one example, an American healthcare company saves years of R&D work by having software identify dangerous drug combinations. This left its human researchers with safer avenues to explore. As the researchers point out, what comes naturally to people, making a joke, for example, can be tricky for machines. And what's straightforward for machines, analyzing gigabytes of data, remains virtually impossible for humans. Business requires both kinds of capabilities. We must see our world as a physical digital space. A purely physical mindset can make us invest in more physical infrastructure when a digital solution could potentially address our needs more efficiently. In the same way, a purely digital mindset can make us miss physical constraints and goals. It is only when we combine both perspectives in a complementary way that we will make the most out of existing infrastructure, building new infrastructure to be future ready, and ensure that technology delivers the result we need from it. One area where the Tata Group has translated this belief into action is in conducting education and employment testing. In the past, for someone living outside a major metro or state capital, the process of giving an entrance exam began with traveling great distances to the nearest testing center. Candidates had to go where the testers were. The costs of travel and living were the candidates to bear. All this happened because the task of testing was highly centralized and dependent on the physical presence of testers. TCS ION, a strategic business unit of TCS, reimagined the process of conducting assessments in a physical digital manner. Turning a physical only centralized and sequential task into one that is managed for both physically and digitally allows it to be distributed and managed in parallel by different resources across the country. As a result, exams today look nothing like they did a decade ago. Physical examination centers connected to digital platform proliferate in small cities and towns. A computer adaptive test adjusts difficulty levels to a candidate's performance. Grading, if not automated, is done in a distributed manner by evaluators on the platform. Gaming the system is almost impossible. Results that took weeks and months previously are available within a few days and are more accurate. Access opens up applicants find assessment centers, previously limited to the big cities, closer home. More than 20,000 jobs have been generated or made more productive, including test center managers, invigilators, and evaluators. The model can scale up to other examinations, evaluators, and geographies rapidly. Last year alone, more than 50 million candidates carried out examinations via the physical digital assessment model. Nearly half of them came from small town India. The same can happen in a large number of other fields, such as the judiciary, logistics, and agriculture. The third lesson is that we need to grasp the shape and sprawl of technology adoption. The adoption of technology is not only about being able to invent the technology itself, it is also about when the technology becomes affordable enough and when the social, legal, and political moment is right. Tractors are an example. The potential for farmers all over the world to use tractors has been 100% since at least the 1930s, when they became cost effective. But it was not until 1969 that 80% of the farmers in the United States owned tractors. In India, through the 1990s, less than 10% of farms of any size owned a tractor, a mechanized plow, or a thresher. The slow adoption of tractors in India was due to their cost and the small size of plots for the most part. But there was also resistance to the new machines from workers and managers. The spread of automation will take time. It will progress in waves across different sectors, at different periods, and at different intensities. When it comes to automation in India's economy, certain sectors, especially high productivity ones that are integrated into global supply chains, might feel its touch earlier, while the rest of the economy may go without seeing substantial changes for years. This is true across different sectors, as it is across different geographies. This in itself is an opportunity. It allows us to design for the future. How we use this long runway matters a great deal. Since Bridgital is all about marrying people with technology, those employed in Bridgital roles will gain vital skills in working and interacting with new age technologies. Bridgital graduates, armed with these transferable technology skills, can galvanize productivity across sectors. In a future of work transformed by the fourth industrial revolution, where every sector adopts technology to a lesser or greater degree, these skills will allow employees of digital projects to move diagonally to other sectors. This will create the essential ramp we need for people to move from the informal sector to the formal, from unskilled to skilled. As digital graduates go on to join other sectors with higher demand and rewards for their skills, less qualified workers can get on the digital ramp. In this vision, the future of training and skilling will be less about specific industries and roles and more about digital skills, understanding how to interact with technology. 21st century skills such as critical thinking, creativity, and collaboration, and lifelong learning. Given the need for a large number of jobs for India's incoming workforce, the country should use the opportunity that technology provides to generate gainful employment instead of investing blindly in labor substituting automation. We should also attempt to bridge the increasingly split nature of India's economy, which has a high productivity formal sector and a low productivity informal sector, but is missing a middle of intermediate productivity, mid skill work. Many workers in the informal sector are trapped in low wage, low productivity employment. They struggle to find jobs in which new skills can be learned, skills that can grant them opportunities in the formal sector. Meanwhile, companies struggle to find the skilled workers they need. The repercussion of the missing middle are increasingly visible. India needs a bridge between the two, a bridge by which lower qualified workers can acquire the digital skills needed to participate in the growth story. This is the opportunity before us, the chance to solve some of our most intractable problems, but it needs our collective intervention and active participation to boost jobs and train our workforce for a digital future. The healthcare system showcases the transformative potential of the Bridgital approach. We cover it in depth in the sections The Access Challenge and Bridgital in Action.